Hello, and welcome to episode 10, the final instalment of Project Milano. It's been quite a journey, but we've finally made it to the end. In the last episode you'll have seen how I designed, printed and painted the cockpit and crew of this amazing ship. In this episode we're going to get everything painted and finished on this massive build. In episode 9 I looked at primers for the cockpit, and in this episode we're going to bring out the big guns. There's a lot of surface to cover, and buying little pots of primer was going to be uneconomical. The rest of Milano is going to be primed with high coat car primer rattle cans in grey. Okay, let's stop faffing about and make a start. I begin with the smaller parts just to get my eye in, spraying the back surfaces first so when I flip the parts to spray the fronts, anything sticking won't show. When you have a lot to spray, you just have to be methodical and work through in batches. Fortunately, I'm spraying on hot summer days, so everything's drying quickly, and I can get a lot done in a day. Spraying in a well-ventilated space is essential, as overspray goes everywhere, covering the studio in fine sticky grey dust. Preparation of the parts is so important prior to spraying, to get the best finish for Milano. I was particularly careful with the wings, as any flaws would show on the final model, and that was the last thing I wanted. Marks from the supports, stray layer lines and facets from the 3D mesh were all dealt with methodically. It's really important to take the time to sort these issues out, as they will show on the final result, and that's not what I want. That's why Milano's taken so long. I've tried to do my best throughout the build, and good results take time. I hope you guys feel it's worth the wait. I then moved on to the rear hull and engine, all of which had lots of complex surfaces to try and get primer into. It actually all went really well. Sometimes things just aren't as difficult as you think they're going to be. With the rear hull tackled, I moved on to the rear thrusters. I was a bit worried about flooding the parts and losing the detail, but it all went fine. This primer sprays and sticks well. It's perfect for Milano. With the top of the thrusters sprayed, it was onto the main event, and I had a strategy for the main hull. The hull is an absolute beast, and I began by spraying the underside from the front. Fortunately, it's a fairly easy shape to spray, with no nasty hidden areas or vertical surfaces. With the first pass dry-ish, I turned the hull around and sprayed the backside, where I couldn't reach from the front. Having left the hull to dry overnight, I turned it over and could now spray the top. I was a bit nervous about this as I wanted to get a good finish, but that wasn't a problem. Again, I turned the hull around and sprayed the back. By now I'd used 4 400ml rattle cans of primer. And here's the hull, after it's been allowed to dry overnight. It's an awesome thing. The finish is great, and I now need to go over it thoroughly and check for any issues before we move on to paint. The hull's also really heavy, but I'll have the weight and some stats for you at the end of the video. The rear hull and engine also came out well. This primer handles the large surfaces and fine detail surprisingly well. The wings are beautiful, perfectly smooth with all the detail intact. This is all such a relief, as I was concerned I would lose what I'd spent so long creating in CAD. Even the rear thrusters had all their detail perfectly preserved. I dread to think how much I would have spent using regular model primers on Milano. Okay, let's get some colour on this ship. I'll be using SMS lacquers on Milano, but having used 4 large rattle cans for priming, I needed an alternative for a base coat. I decided to stick with the rattle cans and go for high coat aluminium. I could then use the SMS metallics to add variation to the finish. Now for the really scary part, spraying everything metallic aluminium. This stuff goes on really well, coverage is excellent, and it's settling perfectly on the primer. So far so good. With new confidence, I flipped the hull and sprayed the upper surface. This time the hull was sprayed on the stand, as any bounce back would affect the underside if it was just resting on the bench. Being fairly flat, getting good coverage wasn't too hard. And here's the hull, with the aluminium coat hardened off overnight. The aluminium shows any flaws in the model, but mercifully there aren't any I need to worry about, as the colour layers will hide those. It is such an amazing shape, such a beautiful ship. I'm so glad I took it on. I used the SMS metallics to add streaking and variation to the aluminium base coat selectively. I found the darker steel and gunmetal gave the best results, and if I went too far, I could always retouch with the SMS aluminium. It worked great on the wings, and here's a selection of other parts I sprayed. Looking at the movie, the back of Milano is much darker than the front, so I used more of the gunmetal on those parts. Now for some proper colour. The orange and blue of Milano does have a very slight hint of metallic, and I achieved this by adding aluminium to the blue and brass to the orange. I spent a long time carefully masking the parts to spray the orange, as I knew retouching the metallics would be a nightmare. The main hull was also masked off, ready for spraying at the same time. Masking is a tedious process, but it's so important to take your time over this crucial stage in the build. A mix of International Orange was laid down as a base coat, and then an overspray of SMS Orange gave some streaking variation. The finish is great. I'm so pleased with the orange. I later flicked in some gold and brass over the top, especially around the nose. With the masking removed from the wings, you can see the super crisp markings. The masking tape took off some of the SMS metallics I'd sprayed earlier, but this was a happy accident, as it gave more variation and detail to the base scheme. With the orange out of the way, I masked everything up again, ready to spray the blue. The hull could be a challenge to mask symmetrically, but the panel lines I added are a great guide and conceal all errors. For the markings, I designed and cut stencils on my silhouette cutter. These and the vac form canopy are available to buy through my website, as are the files for Milano. With the white sprayed, let's remove the stencil and see the famous Milano text. That is so crisp, a perfect result, but what about the rest of the hull? With all the masking removed and the stencils complete, the hull looks fantastic. There were a lot of stages I was worried about, but careful planning helped get a great result. The wings also came out really well. I was happy with the base cars and finishes, but now had to move on to the next stages of hand painting details and weathering with oils. For the oil washes, I used varying mixes of French ultramarine and burnt umber. These are mixed with thinners and then just applied selectively as a wash before any excess is wiped away. Black acrylic is added in all the vents to give depth, and details such as the guns are picked out in various metallics. Here you can see the orange on the nose and some of the upper hull has had an overspray of brass to match the screen images. At this stage there's a lot of toing and froing to get the best balance of colours and weathering to get Milano looking just right. Of course, it's all subjective and you may choose to paint yours differently, but this is my interpretation and I hope you like it. I wasn't going to add lighting to Milano, but instead opted for a technique called Object Source Lighting, or OSL. It involves using paint techniques to mimic the effect of lighting. After looking at a few tutorials online, I bought some paints and invested in some brushes. These are by Artis Opus, and although not cheap, are of exceptional quality. They are from their D range, and I bought their medium and extra large brushes for this technique. I masked and sprayed off the hot areas of the rear thrusters with SMS white and yellow in preparation for the next stage. Using the acrylics and brushes, I dry brushed the surface to achieve the OSL effect. It's a strange thing to do, but it does match the screen images, and that's all I'm trying to achieve here. And these are the 4 thrusters, painted, assembled and finished. I think they look great and will really add to Milano. The massive thrusters under the main hull also get the same treatment, again matching the screen images. Finally, the thrusters in the lower wing are painted using the same technique. Provision is made for wiring runs on all the thrusters, should you wish to add lighting. The cockpit in the tail needs glazing, and I'm going to do this with thin, clear styrene sheet. This is 1/4 mm thick, or 10th thou. To hold it in place, I'm using micro crystal clear, which is great for all model canopies as it dries totally clear. And here's the rear cockpit with the glazing installed. As you can see, there's no sign of any glue. Templates for the windows are included in the instructions. All of the rear hull was oil washed to varying amounts and could now be assembled. The rear cockpit's installed first, with its side guns already attached. Then the upper angled plate followed by the main engine. Finally, the other half is added, closing up the unit. Before the rear hull can be attached to the main hull, the cockpit module has to be slid into the main hull. This is a good fit, but is permanently secured with superglue. Then, after plenty of test fitting, the rear hull is also glued into place. The join is then filled and sanded before being masked up and resprayed using the same process I used for the rest of the hull. The details to the trailing edge were heavily painted with SMS gunmetal and then weathered with oils. I always find it amazing that it's possible to get such convincing finishes with just paints. These will look great in the hull, so let's fit them. They're easy to install and cover up much of the seam between the main and rear hulls. As you'll have seen in episode 8, the upper flaps go in first, then the lower exhausts, followed by the radiators. They fit well and look great. The massive panel behind the cockpit is also painted and weathered along with the flaps that sit just behind the cockpit. Finally, to protect Milano, everything is given a coat of Vallejo satin varnish. This was sprayed with my trusty Harder & Steenbeck Infinity, as were all the SMS paints. For the final time, the crew were installed into the cockpit. Now all the painting was over and they weren't going to get accidentally damaged. I think they look great. There's so much to see on this crazy ship. So much detail. The vac form canopy is now ready to fit, and the 3D printed frame has had a coat of the SMS gunmetal, but it looks bare, so let's do something about that. I designed and printed a decal to recreate the detail on the outside of the canopy. I know it will be impossible to apply in one piece, but by cutting it into sections and applying it bit by bit, I should get a good result. Now we can start final assembly. The rear thrusters just plug in, attached by the magnets I fitted earlier. First the right side, then the left. These can be posed at any angle and can easily be removed for transport or replaced if they get damaged. Then onto the wings. First I'll attach the upper wing to the rotating wing mount. This is just pinned in place by a brass rod, which allows the wing to hinge. The thruster has to be fitted into the lower wing, taking care to align it so the outer cover lines up correctly with the wing, as you can see here. Then all the parts are added to the main wing. None of the parts are glued together, they just fit, again to allow for transport and repair. The parts certainly make up into an impressive unit, that's for sure. Now to attach the wing units to the hull. Again, no glue, they just push in on the massive fixing lugs, first the right, and then the left. And Milano is finally complete. Okay, let's check some final stats before we see Milano in all her glory. At 1/48 scale, Milano has a wingspan of over a metre and weighs in at over 8 kilos. This is a big model and will, I'm sure, be the centrepiece of any collection. And here she is. 2 years ago, I tentatively took on the challenge of recreating Milano. I learned many new skills and techniques along the way, from creating the complex curves that make up Milano's hull to learning new sculpting software. The build has not been without its problems, and losing a lot of CAD work early on really didn't help. At times I wondered if I was going to finish this build, how I'd print it, would it be strong enough, and how was I going to paint it. I'm glad I took that step away last year and built the APC. I came back energised and ready to complete this most challenging of builds. I not only have an incredible model of one of the most stunning ships ever designed, but the skill and experience gained give me confidence to take on greater challenges in the future. I know it's taken forever, but thank you all for sticking with me through this build. Your comments, support and enthusiasm has helped me tremendously, and for that I'm very grateful. Personally, I'm absolutely delighted with Milano. It's everything I hoped for and more. Those who have seen it in the flesh have been blown away. Milano will be on display at our show on August the 17th, before it goes to a collector, so if you're in North Devon, you'll be able to see it. The files for Milano are now available to purchase through my website. There's a link in the description for those of you who'd like to build a Milano of your very own. Very soon I'll be announcing my next build. I know a lot of you are eagerly awaiting the dropship to go with the APC, but before then, I'm going to slip in a quick project I think you'll like. Then it's dropship all the way. I hope you've enjoyed this final episode of Project Milano. If you have, please share with your friends and make sure you subscribe to my channel. So you catch my next video when it goes live, click on the bell icon. To learn about some of the techniques I use, check out my how-to series to find out more about moulding, casting, CAD design and 3D printing. If you have any questions about Project Milano, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.